Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Product School webinar. Thanks for joining us today. Just in case you didn't know, Product School teaches product management, coding, data analytics, digital marketing, UX design, and product leadership courses online and our 16 campuses worldwide. On top of that, every week we offer some amazing local product management events and host online webinars, live streams, and Ask Me Anything sessions. Head over to productschool.com after this webinar to check them out.
All right, hey, I'm Craig. I'm a product manager and growth manager by trade. I'm going to talk today about growth product management and kind of giving a walkthrough of what it is, how a growth team is comprised, what a growth product manager does, some of the perils of how we may be building features and products and some solutions to that. And then we'll talk about how teams are structured, and I'll walk through what I call the step functions of growth. So we'll get started here. So quickly, a little bit about me. I'm a serial entrepreneur with growth and product focus. So I've been doing growth and product professionally for about 10 years. And here's some of the companies that I've been fortunate to work with, as well as advise a whole bunch of other companies. And you know, one of the interesting things that I found myself from a career perspective was moving from kind of very technical all the way back over to marketing, and then kind of meeting in the middle with this focus on growth and product management. So I've kind of done a bunch of different things through my career at companies that are both SaaS-based and well-funded, SaaS-based and bootstrapped, consumer companies, well-funded, and kind of everything in between. So what I'll share with you is meant to be able to be leveraged for pretty much any industry and any type of business that you might have. So we'll start with a definition of what growth is. And so the way I like to define growth is that we tend to look at every stage of the customer journey and ensure that the product or the service that you're providing provides value to the end user throughout the entire customer journey. And so this is a little bit different than maybe what a pure product manager would do. So I'll look at here what a growth product manager actually does. So a growth product manager will typically coordinate with a cross-functional team, kind of making sure that they're building the right things at the right time. A growth PM will also own a backlog of growth items that likely will feed the main product backlog, but often it's run as its own kind of mini backlog within a company. A growth PM will often lead experimentation efforts. They'll kind of do this across the company. And they will also likely own key metrics across the customer journey. You know, kind of the joke with growth leads is that they act as the glue within the company. So you know, growth people will tend to take on pretty much anything, and will often, for good or for bad, be the dumping ground for ideas. And so it's really up to us as growth PMs to make sure that the right ideas are actually what's being shipped. And the growth PM lives at the intersection of marketing, engineering, customer success, and I'll show some examples later on how this works kind of in the real world, but it's very kind of multifunctional, cross-functional within the company. Yeah, so the top line here is the user journey. So kind of users cross marketing, product, and customer success. So the marketing team is generally responsible for getting people to the site or the property or the app or whatever you might have. And so marketing is really responsible for that demand generation. And then product engineering kind of is the middle of the funnel. So making sure that customers are using the product, that the product works, that they love the features, and that they're, you know, obviously providing feedback. And then customer success traditionally will kind of look at the more bottom of the funnel. So ensuring that, you know, they're really the eyes and ears of the customer's heard, the customer's seeing value through the product, and that those customer feedback channels are really open and kind of being fed back. The growth PM actually will work across this entire spectrum. And so it's a really fun role where you get to look at everything from, you know, really top of the funnel through really down funnel, and kind of everything in between. So if you're the type of product manager who has an interest in marketing, then this is a great opportunity to get more involved in marketing. Or if you've got a strong interest in customer happiness or customer success, you can definitely dig in there too. And if you're more traditional and want to kind of stick within the product and engineering world, you can also do that. But bear in mind, the growth PM generally will look at all of these aspects of the customer journey. And similar to how a marketing or maybe a product team would look at kind of the different components that make up the customer journey, this is a pretty common framework called the Pirate metrics. So acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral, where really you're driving people kind of through the funnel. Activation is where you're trying to get people to take the action or the intended action that you want them to take, which feeds to retention, which is really probably the most critical piece of any business. So getting people to come back and experience value again and again. You'll build a nice business by doing that, or a poor one if you don't ever figure that out. Revenue is folks spending money or time, if maybe that's your currency. And then referrals, which is the mechanism by which people tell other people, their friends, family, social networks and things like that about your product, which comes back and feeds acquisition. So as a growth PM, you'll be looking kind of at this entire funnel. So we'll look at why growth is important. Obviously, most startups fail. It's actually usually not because of bad products, but it's usually because of unvetted features and unvetted products, or poor marketing, or poor market related issues. And then I'll show you a couple examples that are pretty sobering from a numbers perspective. So CB Insights in 2018, they had interviewed 101 startups that failed in recent years. They put together this postmortem on these startups. And these are the reasons why startups failed. So let you take a second to digest this, but there's not a lot about core product development in here, but there's a lot of things that actually intersect with the product. So let's keep this in mind, and I'll show you one more. So Paul Graham, I think this was back in 2004, had put together, this was a really long blog post, and this guy, Mark, had put together this visualization, which is pretty cool. I just found it on the internet. But these are the 18 mistakes that kill startups. And again, product isn't really mentioned in here, right? So what this points out is that, growth is just absolutely critical. And I would argue growth product management is one of the linchpins of running a successful startup or a successful business. 74% of failures, if you look at those last two charts, actually had something to do with growth. And growth I would use loosely encompassing parts of product, and certainly a lot of market and marketing. So as a growth PM, you're really in this kind of hypercritical role where you're going to influence a lot of things within the company. So, the growth PM can kind of change the outcome of some of those negative stats that we just saw, really by, again, ensuring that the product and engineering teams are delivering the right thing at the right time. You'll really be the driver and the leader of this effort. And likely you're going to be working as the front lines of experimentation within your company, and validating key hypotheses within the company. And we'll walk through some examples in a little bit. But another way to kind of look at our development life cycle is, depending on the organization. This is obviously not true everywhere, but I've certainly seen this, and I've been guilty of this type of thinking where, you've got an amazing idea, or you think you've got an amazing idea. So you think, hey, this feature that I'm going to build it's really going to move the needle. And so you build. Maybe it takes 2 or 3 sprints, a couple to a few weeks to get done. Not a huge deal. And then you launch, and you're like, we're going to rake it in. And you're like, well, that didn't work. Well, we got to just do one more thing, right? So I'll certainly raise my hand. I've often thought that if we just do one more thing, maybe the feature wasn't right, or it was a little buggy, we just got to do one more thing, and then it's really going to work. It's going to go gangbusters. And so it repeats. So you say you're going to do one more thing, and this update, it's really going to move the needle. So you build, and maybe this time it only takes you 2 sprints. And then you launch and you say, okay, now we're really going to rake it in. And this is what happens. Not every time, but many times. So the product managers in the room, hopefully this isn't offensive, but you know, I've been here many, many times where you just, for whatever reason, whatever you put out there just didn't quite work. So, you know, one of the ways to change that is to actually modify the way that we actually approach building products and approach building features, and really starting with the validation. So validating the need for the product or feature. If you kind of start with that and you start building some evidence as to why that feature is going to add value to the customer along that entire life cycle, then you might be on the right track, or you may strike out less. And so the way to do this is to use a hypothesis-driven approach and starting really simple. So get something basic out, ideally early if you can. And I realize for folks that work at bigger companies, this kind of, you know, fast iteration, you could take on some risk, iterate quickly, like that type of mindset might not work for your organization. But I think if you follow some of the processes that we'll talk about in a little while, you can get some buy-in for it. At early stage startups, this is your lifeblood. So you'll look to leverage feedback from the start. So here's an example hypothesis. So let's say we were an e-commerce site. So because shoppers to my site are adding items to their cart, but they're not checking out right away, if I email them a couple hours later, reminding them to come back to their cart, I'll increase the conversion rate of the people that entered the funnel in the first place by doing so. So that's kind of my hypothesis. This is, you know, kind of your typical cart abandonment. And so we'll revisit that and look at a real example in a little bit. So starting with that hypothesis, the second thing that product managers in growth roles need to do is really give more thought to marketing. And so at the product level, kind of having a framework for what questions to ask yourself before you start building is really critical. So why do we need this feature? That's kind of obvious. Who benefits from it, and where do they benefit, and what percentage of people benefit from this feature? What might this feature detract from? So, you know, it's not uncommon to launch something that kind of solves a particular problem or pain point within your product, but there's unforeseen circumstances where that actually might detract from something else that you have out there in the wild. So, so you kind of need to think through, like, by launching this thing or this feature, what are the potential downsides, and what metrics may it negatively impact? It's kind of that reverse thinking that you need to apply there. What is our goal with this feature? How do we measure if this feature is working or not? So actually, literally, what data will tell us whether or not it's working, or you know, what qualitative feedback will let us know? What's the simplest way we can validate this idea? And then how does this feature improve our ability to own our market? So how does this actually help us get to scale? And then at the marketing level, you know, some things to think about. What and who do I need to support this feature? So, you know, if you're a product team and you're building features and you're launching features, how do customers find out about it, right? Like, traditionally, you'll send a blast talking about the feature, but actually, if you, you know, if you study that, many times those feature release emails and things like that, they've actually got a negative impact on retention, because your core demographic, your core users may not directly benefit from that feature that you're announcing, and it may actually become a detractor. And so you really need to understand, you know, kind of how you're going to market this and how you're going to get the word out about it. And kind of sending an email blast every time you launch something, and maybe writing a blog post is not a bad idea, but it doesn't work for everybody. You know, do you have to write content, emails, drip campaigns? What other parts of your marketing funnel is this thing going to change? And kind of being real about that. So actually coordinating with the marketing team. So I like to pair a product manager with somebody on the marketing team while doing backlog grooming and sprint planning and things like that, so that marketing's got an understanding of what's coming down the pipeline, and actually the effort put into marketing may impact the order by which you build your features. And again, how are users going to learn about this feature? So another way to kind of look at growth is with what I call the step functions of growth. And it looks something like this. At the start, you have nothing. Like, you don't have a feature that maybe you intend to build, or you don't have like a nuanced portion of a product that you maybe want to build. So you've got nothing. And the first step is where you go from something, or where you go from nothing to something. And so in this case, you may test something very, very small. So a small portion of a future feature manually to a few people. From there, you might add a bit of polish. You might get a little bit scientific. So in the 0 to 1, you know, when you're putting features or ideas in front of people, it's probably going to happen through an experiment. You'll probably have a hypothesis for that experiment, but really, like, the purpose here is to do something that's not risky for the business. It's not super polished. It's not super well designed. You're really kind of directionally just looking for, is this thing something that resonates with the vast majority of my audience or not? And you take a very small slice or very small sample size to try to get some of that data. At the 10 to 100, maybe you're getting to some level of statistical significance with your test, and you're getting it in front of more people. And from there, you'll look to kind of get team buy-in, and then that idea becomes a feature. And you know, that's where it really enters the backlog. So at that 10 to 100 stage, that may likely be where you get design involved, or if you've got an actual growth team with a growth designer working on that, it may be taking a larger cohort of users, you know, 10% of your audience, for example, who gets to see this experiment. You get a lot more kind of, you know, qualitative and quantitative support and data at that point around the idea. And then the 100 to scale is where you start to really build it out. And then from there, you're kind of in this constant optimization mode. So once a feature is released, then obviously you're going to continue working on it, but you're going to do that in a very incremental way. So if you follow the step function, what it lets you do is it lets you iterate features faster. And as a growth PM, you can really test a whole bunch of little things kind of rapidly and get this directional kind of signal that tells you if you're onto something before you really put the whole team on building. And of course, you'll have a lot of other items in your backlog that you're kind of positioning these things against. So something to be mindful of. So I'll give you an example. Again, here's our hypothesis from before. This is our simple abandoned cart. So the 0 to 1 was that we weren't sending an email, or we weren't telling people about the fact that they left items in their cart, and now we're going to. So it's as simple as that. And so, you know, you're going to look to validate the hypothesis. You're going to manually pick the small cohort of people who added items to their cart in this case. You'll probably run a query on the database where you've got kind of your user funnel information stored to figure out which people are going to get this first test. And then you may write a very simple script. So in the 0 to 1 here, like firing off 100 emails over a week of time to a group of users, or even just manually writing to 100 users saying, hey, you left some stuff in your cart, like, why don't you come back and check it out? And you can kind of measure that in a very kind of analog manner, very offline manner, to see if it resonates. And then again, you know, determine directionally if the test was a success or failure, and this is very lo-fi. So this is an example from about a year ago that one of my growth leads at a company I was at ran, and you can see here, you know, from the subject line to the content, this email that was sent to somebody who left, in this case, a trip, so it's a business travel platform. They left a trip in their cart. We sent this very generic kind of super canned message that went out to, you know, all 100 people with content. It was simply just meant as a reminder. That proved that, you know, the feedback that we got both from users and from the data directionally said, hey, like, this actually is moving the needle a little bit. Let's invest a little bit more. So the 1 to 10 step was we got a little bit more scientific. we actually pulled in our data science person who was on the growth team, kind of helping us crunch the numbers and pull the right cohort of users. At this point, we pulled in kind of a lightweight design team. We made the email look better. We actually had somebody look at the content and kind of write more personalized content as well. And, we added a little bit more polish, and it looked kind of like this. So now we have an image, we've got the actual location where the person was going to, instead of this generic kind of one size fits all email. We've got this personalized link now for the location where the person was traveling to. So this started to get much more kind of, scientific. And again, here, we proved out that worked. And so at that point, we took that test and we started sending it to almost everybody. And what we learned is that, hey, this works. Like, it's not a detractor. We let that kind of, that 1 to 10 stage run for a few weeks. We got to some level of statistical significance. And we ended up building that test into a main feature that was the starting point for a whole bunch of stuff we did on the activation side. So, basically cart abandonment and other techniques to try to get people back to use our product more. So yeah, it's at that point where things could become a feature. So as a growth PM, kind of when you're thinking about, the level of efforts and who to involve in this stuff, it's like, there's a lot you can do that's really, really lean, that doesn't have to tie up the whole team, for like a whole sprint. In this case, we went through 2 full iterations, and then at the end we said, okay, this is a program, we're going to run it. This is going to be part of our software now. And we built it out. So hopefully that was helpful, just in terms of, kind of how to kind of put some of those tests out there. We'll look at the team side a little bit. So growth teams vary. The key players on a growth team, obviously the growth product manager is kind of the glue that kind of holds the team together. They may be coming up with a lot of the ideas. They might be talking to customers. They're certainly talking to internal stakeholders within the company. And they're working really closely day to day with a growth marketer, probably a data scientist or data analyst. If you don't have a data scientist or data analyst, then you, the growth PM, are probably going to be doing the data work, or you'll have to kind of borrow time from an engineer. You may have a growth engineer, and you might have a designer. So the composition, though, varies wildly from company, industry, size of company, funding, et cetera. And I've kind of seen every iteration of that mix. You might have a dedicated team of growth people with dedicated growth PMs, or you may have completely non-dedicated, part-time, just beg, borrow, and steal within the organization, and kind of pros and cons of each of those. And the other interesting thing is that sometimes growth, and then kind of growth PM kind of inherits this, but sometimes growth actually owns marketing. And so, I've been at companies and have worked with companies where there's no marketing team. And so the growth team is responsible for customer acquisition. And that happens obviously through referrals and organic and other means, but the growth team and the growth PM really have to coordinate a lot of that top of the funnel traditional marketing stuff that they may not actually even know much about, right? So, as a growth PM, you really need to be flexible in thinking and really dig in on the marketing side, like we looked at earlier in the deck here, but you might end up actually owning components of marketing. Oftentimes you don't, but you never know. I already showed that. So here's an example of a small startup team structure where, let's say the startup maybe raised less than $1 million. Head of product in this case will run growth, and the resources are going to be part-time. In this case, there's really no real growth team. Experiments are going to be owned by the PM. One of my companies, Votion, had this really as an example where I was running product and growth, and I had a marketer, and we had a very small team that kind of covered the rest of the ground across the funnel. There's, for slightly larger companies, both established companies as well as growth stage companies, you may have a structure where kind of the team is still shared across the organization. So you don't have dedicated engineers and marketing people necessarily, or data scientists, but the head of growth, along with a growth product manager, will kind of wrap their arms around this whole thing and kind of own all of the aspects of growth, but they won't have a fully dedicated team. And so I ran growth at a company called Upside that was like this. Another structure is that the head of product has, it's very similar, but it's, instead of a head of growth, there's a head of product and then a growth PM. And again, this kind of cross-functional part-time team. So this is also pretty common. And then there's the fully independent structure. So, Uber, Facebook, a lot of the really high growth companies, they didn't necessarily start this way, but a lot of them ended up with growth and kind of growth product people being autonomous units within the company. And so you have a head of growth who may actually report to the CEO, who has, growth PMs, data scientists, marketers, engineers, and they run kind of on their own and collaborate with product and engineering and marketing, but they're really self-sufficient, and they're really able to kind of autonomously make decisions and drive a ton of feature development from a growth perspective. And then there might be a functional model where the head of growth might manage the team by function. And so in this case, you may have a head of growth who focuses on activation, puts a growth product manager in activation. So for some of you that are kind of already out there as product managers and want to become growth PMs, if you instead of kind of going all in and looking at the whole funnel, you could also specialize. So if you're SEO specific and you've got strong SEO chops, you could present yourself as a growth PM who specializes in SEO, and have a really fun time kind of leading a cross-functional team of growth people just focusing on SEO. Same with email, same with activation. Companies like Pinterest, there's a ton of growth startups and larger companies that have this kind of functional, this functional brand of product marketing or product management with growth sprinkled in. What's nice about this too is that you're able to kind of work across the spectrum. So if you are a SEO growth PM and you want to work on activation or onboarding or email retention, whatever it is, it's likely that you'll have an opportunity to kind of swap with other PMs and kind of keep it fresh. And so, if you're kind of like a constant learner and you want to be able to kind of navigate across the company, this could be a really interesting fit for you. So yeah, I think hopefully that provided some value. I think the key takeaways are, look at marketing and really dig in on the marketing side. Use a very test-driven kind of iterative approach to building features and building products. Do it in a minimal way. Use those step functions, and really kind of put yourself in a spot where you're working cross-functionally with every department that is either getting customers to do something, getting customers to buy something, or getting customers to tell other customers about you. And as a product manager, whether you've got kind of growth in your title or not, as a product manager, you're gonna build a stronger foundation. And as your companies grow and as you move forward in your career, you'll have a better opportunity to kind of navigate the landscape, really regardless of what company you work for. So you can reach out to me at any point. I'm always happy to talk about growth and product. So my email's up here. So thanks so much for your time.